this evening is very simple, and it's no particular order. I will present them in the order in which their presentations will be made. So our first speaker for the evening is Dr. Mwanza Kamata. Did I get it right? Dr. Mwanza Kamata. Dr. Kamata is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Dar es Salaam. Born in Bariadi in Tanzania, Dr. Kamata received his PhD in political science from the University of Dar es Salaam. He's extensively published in the area of African politics and development. And he's one of the 3 lead authors of this biography of Julius Nyerere. It's a 3-volume biography. And there are copies outside for those of us who might like to keep one. And it would not be wrong to say that apart from Mwalimu himself, Dr. Kamata and this work has contributed in assembling us here today. Not only did these volumes inspire the initiatives that led to this colloquium, but it has been a guide in the process of planning for it. And I hear there is even another volume in the coming, and we can't wait to lay our hands on it and to read it. So this evening, Dr. Kamata will be opening our colloquium presentation with a keynote titled Julius Nyerere, a lifelong solidarity with the poor and the peoples of the South. Please, a round of applause for Dr. Kamata. Our second keynote speaker is Dr. Ethan Sanders. Dr. Sanders is an associate professor of history, politics, and political economy at Regis College, a Jesuit Catholic institution in Denver, Colorado, in the United States. He completed his doctoral work at the University of Cambridge, where he was drawn to the emerging subfield of global intellectual history with a geographic focus on Africa and the Indian Ocean world. Broadly speaking, he is interested in the political and religious history of Africa, and he has previously published on the Zanzibar Revolution and the Cold War, African political thinkers, missionaries and empire in Africa, Christian-Muslim relations in East Africa, and gender and ethnicity in Zanzibar. Dr. Sanders is currently working on 2 book-length projects. The first is titled, Building the African Nation, ... The African Association and Pan-Africanism in the 20th Century East Africa, under contract with Cambridge University Press, which looks at how early strands of Pan-African thought ignited the political imagination of East African intellectuals and political activists in the colonial and post-colonial periods. The second one is a religious and intellectual biography of Julius Nyerere. Titled, Beyond Research, he sees his vocation as a scholar mentor and was attracted to Regis College because of the Ignatian principle of cura personalis, or care for the whole person, which most of us students here at the Gregorian understand. This evening, Dr. Sanders will be making a keynote presentation titled, Africa's Soulful Politician, ... Human Dignity and Equality in the Thought of Julius Nyerere. Dr. Sanders, you're very welcome. And our third speaker is someone many of us know. It's Reverend Dr. Festo Nkenda, S.J., even though he forced us to put Father Nkenda as Jesuits are wont to do. Dr. Festo Nkenda, S.J., is a Jesuit priest from Tanzania who is currently serving as academic director of the Roman Archives of the Society of Jesus. A historian of Africa, Dr. Nkenda holds an MA from the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, and a DPhil from the University of Oxford. While Dr. Nkenda maintains scholarly interest in the areas of identity, nationalism, and unity in Africa, as well as contextualized theology and spirituality, and I'm sure the ambassador would like this, and the Kiswahili language. In fact, he has a translation of the spiritual exercise into Kiswahili. Most of Dr. Nkenda's research has focused extensively on Jesuit history in Africa. His most recent publications include, first, Jesuits in Africa, a historical narrative from Ignatius of Loyola to Pedro Arrupe, which came out last year, and this year, A Splash of Diamond, the Jesuit presence in Ethiopia from 1945 to the present. This evening, Dr. Nkenda will be offering the third keynote on the title, Francis, Nyerere, and Politics as a Space for Human Encounter. So my brothers, my sisters, and my friends, please, may we put together a round of applause as we invite Dr. Kamata to come and deliver the first keynote.
Good evening. Habari za jioni ndugu zangu. And I'm deliberately using ndugu zangu because to Mwalimu, binadamu wote ni sawa. All human beings are equal, according to Mwalimu. And he taught us to believe that and to exercise that principle. But there is a second related one where he says, binadamu wote ni ndugu zangu. All human beings, literal translation will be, all human beings are my brothers and sisters. They are relatives. But there is a joint to that where he says, all human beings are my brothers and sisters, and Africa is one. So we grew up in Tanzania, referring to each other as Ndugu. And Ndugu Balozi, we didn't use Excellency Balozi. We would say, as today in Swahili, we say Mheshimiwa Balozi, but during Mwalimu's era, it was Ndugu Balozi. We are all equal. He was, we are equals, but he's one among equals as a leader. So I have begun with that just to remind ourselves of what Mwalimu wanted to promote in the country. And it has been mentioned here that Mwalimu built a nation of Tanzanians. So when I was invited, and I should not forget to thank Father Albert and Nkenda for searching for who should be invited to come from Tanzania to speak on Mwalimu. And I was lucky to be invited. I think because I happened to be privileged to be part of the project of writing the biography of Mwalimu, which has been introduced to you shortly. But when I was asked what to talk, to choose what I was invited, and I was told, just tell us what you want to talk about. And it took me some time, and then I decided to talk about Mwalimu and his lifelong solidarity with the poor people of the South. But what inspired me is Mwalimu's speech, which he made in 1970, which some of you might have read it. And it was a speech to the Merricknell sisters in 1970 in New York. And the title of the speech is Church in Society. And Mwalimu speaks and expresses his concern of how societies were and how the world was during that time. And his description was that the world was divided between the rich and the poor. Societies, especially in the poor countries, were also divided between the rich and the poor. And whoever selected that short clip of Mwalimu, I would say thank you, because you have assisted me to say partly what I was or had planned to say. So that's what inspired me to think of Mwalimu and his solidarity with the poor peoples of the South. Basically, he talks about the peoples and the nations. And in this particular clip, he was talking about nations, poor nations. Wealth flows from the poor nations and goes to the rich nations. And that was a major concern. And I would quickly say that that has not changed. It was 1970, it is 2003, that has not changed. As the poor in societies, in Africa, for example, Mwalimu was concerned about the division between the rich and the poor. Wealth flows from the poor to the rich. And that creates inequality and injustice. So the source of all injustice in the world, according to Mwalimu, was that division and the system which allows that division to continue. So probably I should say a few things about Mwalimu before I proceed. Mwalimu was born in Butiama, and those who will be interested, I brought a few books for those who will be interested, and the history of Mwalimu's childhood, education, etc., is all in the 3 volumes. Mwalimu was baptized in 1943. And one of the anecdotes in the book is that when Mwalimu was baptized, he didn't choose a name for himself. The name was given. And so the name given to him was Julius. And then he was very curious to know who is this Julius. He found out he was a saint, but he was disappointed that, yes, he was a saint, but he was not one of the most famous saints. So maybe if he was given a chance to choose a name for himself, he would have chosen a name of a most famous saint. But now there is a whole process of Julius, named after Saint Julius, of becoming a saint himself. Julius led his country in the struggle for independence. That was Tanganyika from 1954, when they formed, officially, when they formed the nationalist party called Tanganyika African National Union, and Mwalimu became the president of that party. But it's also very important to mention here that Mwalimu was a teacher, and he taught in two different Catholic schools. One is St. Mary's, Tabora, after he graduated from Nyerere, and then he went to Edinburgh. He came back to Tanganyika, and he taught at St. Francis College from 1953 to 1955. And I want to say something about that. He would have continued to be a teacher after 1955. He was in a Catholic college, and it was a safe haven for a nationalist. But prior to that, the colonial government has issued a circular to all government employees that they have to choose their jobs or their involvement in politics, even becoming a member of a political party. So it started with those who were working in the government. But then they realized that was not enough, because all these people, like Julius, Kambarage, Nyerere, who were involved in politics, they were working for non-governmental institutions, and the church was one of them. But they found a reason, and the reason was churches were receiving subsidies from the government to pay salaries. So they wrote another circular instructing the churches that whoever was working with them but was involved in politics, he had to make a choice to continue working as a teacher or to resign as a teacher and work as a politician. So Father Willis called Mwalimu and informed of this choice. And Mwalimu chose to resign as a teacher and chose to continue with political work. This is always made as a reference on the sacrifice Mwalimu made, because he was jobless. Immediately, he was jobless. He didn't have a house to go to. He had a family, he had a wife and 2 children. So Mwalimu, I think, chose to go back to Butiama, and he stayed there for a long time. He had a choice of looking for a job, and there were so many jobs available. He was educated, etc., but he chose not to. And in Butiama, there are stories about when he was working with the church, translating the catechism from English to Kizanaki, etc. So anyway, those are some. But this is a sacrifice he made, a choice he made at the early days of the struggle for independence to devote his time in the struggle for the independence of his country. And when he came back to Dar es Salaam, he lived on assistance from his colleagues, because the party had no enough money to pay him a salary. Okay, so that's how things were happening. But then we fought for independence, and independence came earlier than it was expected, because if you read the book, when Mwalimu was asked, when do you expect independence of Tanganyika to come, Mwalimu would say maybe in 15 or 25, because colonialism was universally within the colonies not an acceptable system. And it was very easy, of course, with some difficulties, to organize the colonized against colonialism. So Mwalimu, like Jomo Kenyatta, like Kamuzu Banda, like Hofud Bonye, like many other leaders, he happened to be a leader of a liberation movement which led his country to independence. But what is unique is that, what do you do with independence? Of course, the masses had their own aspirations. the elite, the nationalists who provided leadership also had their own expectation after independence. And the immediate, for most of the African elite who led the independence, was to occupy the privileged positions left by the colonizers. So they became ministers, they became principal secretaries, they became heads of parastate organization, etc. So privileged position. That's one. But two, they started using their position to accumulate wealth for themselves. So it started happening in Tanzania, but immediately after independence, Mwalimu was asking himself a question. What kind of Tanganyika, what kind of society is Tanganyika going to be? And what kind of leadership will be required to lead the Tanganyikans into that kind of society? In 1962, the ambassador mentioned 1962 February, I think Mwalimu resigned as prime minister. Of course, I won't go into that. He resigned. But one of how he spent his time, okay, he was mobilizing and reorganizing his party, but he was also translating Shakespeare's book, The Merchant of Venice, and the Merchant of Venice and Julius Caesar into Kiswahili. But he also had time to articulate his idea of ujamaa. And he wrote a pamphlet which was published in 1962, Ujamaa, the Basis of African Socialism. He had thought about ujamaa before, but it was not articulated. So he produced that. But that was not the time when the ujamaa was implemented in Tanzania until 1967. And Mwalimu had he had more time to refine his idea of the kind of society we wanted to build in Tanzania. And that came in 1967 when Mwalimu pronounced the Arusha Declaration. So I'm saying this because Mwalimu was concerned with the kind of situation after independence and what was unfolding in the country. His colleagues were busy accumulating for themselves, forgetting that there were millions of Tanganyikans who needed attention, who needed their aspirations to be translated in an independent country. And to him, the future society, and I will, because I'm here, Mwalimu's Jerusalem for Tanganyika. Mwalimu's Jerusalem for Tanganyika was ujamaa. A society where men and women are equal and are treated as human beings, where there will be no exploitation between man and man or a group of men exploiting others. So that was one of the issues which concerned Mwalimu. And so in that sense, I say it's a choice he made, and it was a reflection of his solidarity, a continuation of solidarity with the masses with whom he fought for independence of Tanganyika, but he was also articulating and identifying with their concerns. That's one aspect, but the second aspect is Mwalimu's involvement in the fight against colonialism elsewhere in Africa. The ambassador mentioned it, and Tanzania led the struggle for independence of other countries. And I think this is one area which needs a lot of more study on the contribution and the sacrifice that Tanzania and other Africans made. But one could also pose a question that you had Malawi in the front line, but it was not a frontline state. which was an independent African country. So it was not necessarily natural for a country to become in the front line of the liberation struggle in Africa. But Tanzania chose, and led by Mwalimu. And one could even ask a question, if we didn't have Mwalimu, would Tanzania become a bastion of liberation of Africa as it is known today? That's a question that I leave it for discussion. So that's another aspect, because Mwalimu believed that colonialism is universally a bad system, and it has to be rejected and fought against. And there is a quote which I would like to share with you. Mwalimu says that colonialism implies inferiority of the colonized, and acceptance of it means an automatic limit to self-respect. End of quote. And there is this other long quote, which I would also want to read, that why you should fight against colonialism. If you are independent Tanganyika, why should you be fighting the war of the Mozambicans or the Zimbabweans, etc.? And Mwalimu says that those who governed us felt that they had a right, a genetic right to govern us. If the right to govern was based on gene, the misfortune of being governed was also being based on gene. If the independence of Mozambique was being still questioned by the Portuguese on the basis of gene, certainly the Portuguese were not accepting the independence of Tanzania. They would be tolerating it, but not accepting it. And so it was important to complete the independence of Tanzania. You had to work together with the people of Mozambique to get rid of the Portuguese or teach them a lesson, end of quote. So that's another aspect of Mwalimu fighting against systems that are oppressive, exploitative, and humiliating to human beings. But there is another aspect that Mwalimu was concerned with. Okay, domestically, I've tried to touch on, but also in the region in terms of liberation struggle. But Mwalimu was concerned with the international system and how divisive it was. The clip, as I said, assists me to quickly shed lights on this. And Mwalimu completes, and there is a sentence where he says, this has to be changed, and it must be changed. Now, the modalities of change. What is the method of change? When it comes to liberation struggle, Mwalimu accepted the use of violence as a means of struggle, as a means of changing and removing an oppressive system. And at the international level, one of the approach was for Mwalimu to mobilize other countries, other nations, and he was involved in many initiatives. And one I will mention quickly was the call for new international economic order in 1970s, new international economic order. But the last initiative that he was involved is the South Commission, which was trying to find a solution of the South on how to promote their, to get solution to their problem without depending on the North. And this happened because the North and the South were involved in a dialogue, and the dialogue was on changing the existing economic order, and that collapsed. If you remember, some of you who may recall, it was 1980, Mexico, Cancun. There was a conference between the North and the South, and it didn't work, it collapsed, and the South was compelled to look for a solution from the South. And one of the things that was proposed was that the South must cooperate among themselves and seek a South collective self-reliance to get rid of the existing system and free themselves from it. And finally, it's Mwalimu's call for the oppressed to rebel. And this is in the speech to the Malikron sisters. Mwalimu was making a call to the church, to the people of the souls, and any institution which matters, that you have to make a choice. One, on whose side are you? Are you on the side of the oppressor or on the side of the oppressed? And what should be done? And to Mwalimu, what should be done was, and I think still is, to rebel against the oppressive system. And Mwalimu had different ways of pushing his agenda. And I would like to complete by reading you a quotation of a conclusion of Mwalimu's speech at the United Nations in 1985. That was his final speech at the UN. And Mwalimu said, and I want to read this to you because Mwalimu never kept silent whenever injustice happened and wherever injustice happened. And Mwalimu said the following. Okay, it's here. To be silent, you might have heard it. To be silent when we see danger. To refrain from attacking policies which we see to be contrary to the interests of peace and justice. To do those things would be to surrender our freedom and our dignity. That we shall never do. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause. Asante, Dr. Sorry, because we are running out of time. Sometimes we say there is time in Africa, but it seems we are outside Africa, even though we are talking of this big person from Africa. So thank you so much. And it is very true that we are walking on the shoulders of great personalities, and knowing our history is fundamental. So thank you so much. I guess we deserve a break. Eh? What do you say? 20 break ama tubaki? As you see right now, I cannot even speak the small Swahili I know because balozi yako. Okay, so we are going for a very short break, 10 minutes, and we will start at exactly 16:45, okay? So once again, the washrooms for ladies are at our right, just right at the corner on your right as soon as you get out of this building. And the ones for men are parallel at the opposite, okay? In case you want some coffee, some tea, some whatever it may be, the coffee shop is just before you enter to the washrooms of men, okay? So you can even check some information from there because, the Gregorian students are here. So asanteni and feel at home. Ujamaa, the Ujamaa spirit. Thank you so much also for those who are connected, those who are online. Asanteni and feel at home. We are going for break for 10 minutes. At 16:45, we are back.
Askofu mkuu wa Jimbo Kuu Katoliki la Dar es Salaam wa Shamjudi Tadeusi Ruwaichi anawaalika madekano, maparoko, mapadri, watawa wa kike na wa kiume, viongozi halmashauri walei, hawaka ngazi zote na waamini parokia na parokia teule zote kushiriki misa takatifu ya sherehe ya mavuno, shukrani na tegemeza jimbo itakayoadhimishwa Jumamosi Novemba 25 katika viwanja vya jimbo vilivyopo Geza Ulole, Kigamboni. Maaskofu wasaidizi Mwashamu Henry Mchamungu na Mwashamu Stefano Musomba pia watashiriki. Muda wa kuwasili ni saa 2 kamili asubuhi. Maandamano ya kuingia viwanjani yataanza saa 2:30 asubuhi. Misa takatifu itaadhimishwa kuanzia saa 3 kamili asubuhi. Maelekezo ya namna ya kufika katika viwanja vya Geza Ulole yametolewa na Chancellor Padri Vincent Mpwaji kupitia parokia na parokia teule zote. Pia yanapatikana vigangoni na katika jumuiya ndogo ndogo za Kikristo. Unaweza kufuatilia mitandao ya halmashauri walei, hawaka na shirikisho la vyama vya kitume Shivyaki. Nyote mnakaribishwa.